leaked Big Navi ray tracing performance is looking really good. Let's talk about it. Before that, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss another video. So recently, WCCF Tech shared some ray tracing benchmarks of AMD's RX 6800 graphics card, which were leaked over on Twitter by @PJLabUH, which, by the way, as always, links to both these sources will be in the description below. But in any case, if true, these leaked benchmarks show some really impressive results for AMD's most affordable Big Navi graphics card. So in order to get a better idea of just how fast this graphics card is, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some charts that were shared over on WCCF Tech's website that show the RX 6800 versus the RTX 3070 and RTX 2080 Ti with both DLSS on and off in 4K and 1440p. So going ahead and taking a look at this first chart here, we can see that in 4K in Shadow of the Tomb Raider with ray tracing on high in the Ultra preset and with 8 times anisotropic filtering, which is a little bit strange to me because, you know, most modern graphics cards can run 16 times anisotropic filtering no problem, but whatever, I guess that's what they did. WCCF Tech took a 3070 and a 2080 Ti and did the exact same settings with what they said was a similar CPU to try and get the most accurate results to compare as possible. And here we can see that the RX 6800 is actually faster than the 2080 Ti and RTX 3070, which, by the way, keep in mind this is with ray tracing on the high preset, so it's actually very demanding type of ray tracing load. I believe it's shadow-based ray tracing effects. So, you know, that it's very impressive to see that AMD is actually able to beat the RTX 2080 Ti and RTX 3070, since those graphics cards are supposed to be very fast in terms of their ray tracing performance, though that is with the DLSS option turned off. Now, when you turn DLSS on, the RTX 3070 and 2080 Ti do end up being a little bit faster than the RX 6800, but it's still very impressive. And, you know, to get a little bit more specific here, with DLSS off, the RX 6800 is about 21% faster than the RTX 3070. Now, if you turn DLSS on, you'll actually see that the RTX 3070 ends up being 17.3% faster. So it kind of turns the tables there, and it goes to show you just how important DLSS can be in a ray trace type of workload. So, you know, moving on to the 1440p results, where supposedly these Big Navi GPUs should be very strong in terms of their actual performance because they're supposed to scale pretty well at these lower resolutions, whereas the Ampere architecture actually scales a little bit worse at the lower resolutions than the architecture that came before it, the Turing architecture. But in any case, we can see here that we have pretty similar results once again, with the RX 6800 actually beating the 2080 Ti and 3070 when they have DLSS off, and it's losing by a little bit when you turn DLSS on. Now, again, to be a little bit more specific, we have a similar result here where with the RX 6800 with DLSS off versus the 3070, you can see that the 6800 is actually about 8% faster than the 3070, and then if you turn DLSS on, it looks like the RTX 3070 gets to be around 6% faster. So once again, you can see there that DLSS can really make or break for NVIDIA. But, you know, after looking at these charts, I gotta say, if this does turn out to be true, which keep in mind, you know, these are actually just kind of leaks and rumors, so it could turn out that this ends up being a false rumor, and it turns out that the 6800 is way slower in ray tracing. We don't 100% know yet, but it looks like if this does end up being true, which I kind of think it is going to be true, that the RX 6800 is going to be a little bit better at ray tracing than we all thought. In fact, without any DLSS type of support, it looks like AMD's ray tracing implementation could potentially, at least in this one game, be a little bit better than what NVIDIA's implementation is, which is very surprising because you got to remember that this is AMD's first foray into the whole ray tracing thing. Now, of course, they got to see NVIDIA go at it, so they got, you know, it's kind of like watching someone jump over something first and then they miss maybe, or they, you know, fall a little bit and hurt themselves, and then you get to learn from their mistakes. So yeah, AMD kind of gets to learn from NVIDIA's mistakes for them, you know, having the prices too high, and maybe they made some technical mistakes, and, you know, AMD was actually able to learn on that and improve. But, you know, again, it's really impressive to see, because I was expecting AMD, and I think a lot of other people were probably expecting AMD to be quite a bit slower than NVIDIA, even with DLSS turned off. So again, this is very impressive, very nice to see that AMD is going to come out swinging here in terms of the ray tracing performance if this does turn out to be true, because, you know, I think it's a very important feature to have going forward. You know, even though right now the majority of games, and probably even over the next couple of years, the majority of games really won't have too much ray tracing implemented in them, it's still going to be an important feature that you're going to need in a graphics card. And if you're going to implement it, you might as well do it well, because, I mean, who's going to play Cyberpunk and turn ray tracing on if it, you know, drops you down to like 30 frames a second? At that point, it doesn't really make any sense, and you're going to end up turning the ray tracing tracing settings off. But if Cyberpunk ends up coming out, which by the way, I'm using that as an example because there's tons and tons of people looking forward to this game, and I know a lot of those people do want to play it at the absolute max settings, including ray tracing. So if it comes out and you can turn on ray tracing on both these cards and it runs really well, well then that, you know what, that's kind of a big win for AMD. But there's one thing we are not really talking about here, and that's the DLSS, type of performance. Now, I've heard that apparently AMD is working on some sort of DLSS implementation based off of the DirectML from Microsoft, with the direct machine learning, which should allow for kind of an open platform for people to work on stuff like taking a 1080p image and moving it to 4K, which is basically what DLSS does. You can take a lower resolution image and then upscale it and use AI to do it so it looks really, really good. In fact, I think that when DLSS works really well, like their newest implementation from NVIDIA, it actually looks pretty much indiscernible from the actual native image unless you sit there and really stare at it. So it's important to get that working, and apparently AMD is working on it, but I just want to tell you, I don't really know when it's coming out. Now, it could come out 2 months from now, 6 months from now, or we could end up waiting until AMD's next generation of cards before they have their DLSS competitor perfected. So, I really hope we don't see that. I hope it does end up coming out fairly soon, but you know what? They might end up scrapping it. I have no idea how long it could be until they have something like that out, but it's very important that they do because, as you can see with NVIDIA, it makes a huge difference in terms of performance. So if AMD's already having pretty dang good ray tracing performance, in fact, all they really need to do is basically like touch NVIDIA's ray tracing performance with their big toe, just barely. If they can do that and then all of a sudden they get DLSS performance working, well then you're looking at a card that not only is going to beat the RTX 3070 in terms of regular DirectX 11 performance, but on top of that it could be very competitive in terms of the ray tracing performance and potentially even beat it, which I think would be kind of embarrassing for them. I got to be honest with you, because we were all expecting the 6800 to beat the 3070 in traditional rasterized performance. Even AMD showed that it was beating it significantly in the slides that they showed during their presentation, but to beat it in ray tracing, I think that's something that basically none of us were actually going to be expecting here. So I'm very impressed by this. I really do hope it's true. I think that it probably is true. Now, whether or not this is immature drivers, it could be that the ray tracing that's happening on AMD's cards is much lower quality. That's something we don't know, but so far I'm liking what I'm seeing, and I'm very excited to get a hold of some of these RX 6000 series graphics cards, because it's looking like we're not going to be able to get a hold of any NVIDIA cards, because my lord, it is basically impossible to get a 3070, 3080, or 3090 right now, which is just absolutely ridiculous. It's been over a month for the 3080 since it's been out, and there's absolutely no stock whatsoever. I mean, you can be sitting there with multiple tabs open, refreshing with all kinds of stuff, sending you emails with auto notify on, and you are not going to get an RTX 3080 unless you're incredibly lucky. And that goes the same for the 3070 and 3090, which is surprising because I'm a little bit sad to see that there's so many people lining up to pay $1,700 plus $1,500 plus dollars for a GPU that, let's be honest, is a gaming card. The RTX 3090 is not a workstation card. Yes, it's a better workstation card than the other cards because it has a whole lot of VRAM, but it doesn't have any professional drivers. It's a GeForce card. It is definitely a gaming card. So to see so many people lining up to pay so much money for that is a little bit saddening to see, but it's even more sad to see that you can't get one. So hopefully AMD pulls through. I really want to see these cards. I think that if they actually have stock on release, we could be looking at this first generation here in a possibly ever where AMD actually outsells NVIDIA. And I think it's a big opportunity for them. And you know what? I think that competition is just good for the industry overall. And it's nice to see that both AMD and NVIDIA are bringing us some really competitive products. And I can't wait to get something in my hands soon. But hey, that's just what I think. What do you think about this RX 6800 leak? Do you think that it's true, or do you think that it's false? I'd like to see what you have to say in the comments below. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, NVIDIA and Intel drop prices. Also, if you want to see more, click here. You won't be disappointed.